Okay, the fourth and last of our modern monotheistic religions, and one which some people might say is not really a religion at all, but sometimes it's called a way of life or something like that, is the Rastafarian movement, of which you'll have some familiarity if you listen to reggae music, Bob Marley and so on, and things like that. And you see the Rastas with their curly hair and so on. So we're going to examine this movement, this religion today, okay? So we'll begin, as we've done before, with some basic information. Here is Bob Marley and the Wailers, as they were. I'm not sure exactly when, 1970s by the looks of it or something. Obviously, stereotypical image of what Rastafarians are like. In terms of the history of this movement, it began in Jamaica, the Caribbean, in the 1930s. Okay, it originated during that time. In fact, technically, some people would say because of the coronation of Haile Selassie as Emperor of Ethiopia in 1930. Okay, that sparked the movement off, and we'll say more about him in a minute. But it began emerging and developing during that time. It is separate from, but kind of overlaps with or influenced by, the ideas of Marcus Garvey. Anyone ever heard of Marcus Garvey? Do you know who he is? Ever heard of his name? He was a Jamaican, I suppose we could say, activist and intellectual writer during the really big early decades of the 20th century. He died in 1940, I think. And he developed the idea of what we sometimes call Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, anyone want to guess what that might mean? Pan means, it's a Greek, I think it's Greek prefix. It does something to us. If something is...
Pan-Turkism, Pan-Slavism, it's, I guess, the idea that those people should come together and like self-determination, live in their own states, defend their own rights.
That's right. It's a kind of political and to some extent cultural movement which wants people of a certain ethnicity, in this case people who are either African or like Jamaicans of African descent but don't live in Africa, but they consider themselves to be Africans in that sense. People of African origin and descent should have self-determination, very important. And should in one way or another be kind of unified, brought together, and so on. Okay. Obviously, in this case, you have people living in Africa, and you have people living in other parts of the world, especially in the Americas, of African origin, obviously very, very physically separated, but they want to come together. In addition, of course, Africa at this time, in the early 20th century, was colonized by European powers, primarily with the one exception, the one country which was not controlled directly or indirectly by Europeans was Ethiopia. Okay, Ethiopia was independent, and this is perhaps why it's so important, particularly at that time. So Ethiopia was the only country in Africa which retained its independence. For a while, in the 1930s, the Italians tried to take over Ethiopia, but eventually were defeated under Mussolini, under the fascists. So even Ethiopia, for a while, was taken over. But primarily, Ethiopia is the only country in Africa that was not colonized and controlled either directly or indirectly by European powers. So it becomes the focus for this kind of thing as well. So you have Africa, which is colonized, and then you have Africans living in other parts of the world, okay, wishing to kind of return physically or mentally to Africa as well, and identifying themselves as Africans. And these are the kind of ideas of Marcus Garvey. Garveyism, it's sometimes called, whatever. And although he was not a Rastafarian, his ideas influenced the Rastafarian movement, and they consider him to be a kind of prophet. Again, in a way like we have John the Baptist in Christianity. They see him as a kind of guy who comes before the main prophet. Okay, so you have John the Baptist, and he was followed by Jesus. Or we said we have the Bab in Baha'ism, who was followed by the real big guy, Baha'u'llah. So in the same way, they sometimes consider him to be one of their prophets, okay, looking forward to the ideas of the real movement and so on. Rastafarianism takes its name from the phrase Rastafari, and these are two different words, okay, which was the name of Haile Selassie, the emperor of Ethiopia, this guy, before he became emperor. Okay, it's quite common for people when they take on a new special position, they often take on a new title as well, like the popes. Okay, you think of all the popes, Papa in Rome. They have an ordinary name, but when they become pope, they become Pope John or John Paul. They take a special name. This is the coronation name of this guy, and before that he was called Rastafari. Ras is in fact the same, it's connected to Reis, Arabic you have in Turkish, meaning head, or here it's a title, it means kind of leader or something. So his real name was Tafari, and we'll look at his name again afterwards. So when we talk about Rastafarians, it's kind of mixing his name up, okay, because they stress this guy. And we'll say more about him, obviously, in a minute. These days, especially, since like the 1960s or whatever. Okay, Tujay?
Did Marcus Garvey or Rastafari see himself as a prophet?
Neither of them. The Rastafarians call them prophets, okay? Marcus Garvey was a separate guy. He was a separate thinker. He was a black intellectual nationalist, okay, who thought about Pan-Africanism. He was not a Rastafarian, but the Rastafarians like his ideas, so they take some of those ideas and they call him a prophet, okay. Rastafari, Haile Selassie, and we'll say more about him in detail.
Rastas claim he has some divine powers or something as a prophet, or do they just...
I'm not very sure how far they go with that. I mean, in terms of, prophecy, being a prophet is mainly what you say, what you prophesy, the ideas you have in that sense. So I don't know if they actually say he has kind of miraculous powers or something, but for them, his ideas were prophetic. His ideas were important in that sense, okay. Probably different people will have different interpretations. So we've got two people, neither of whom are Rastafarians, and neither of whom believe in it or did. Okay, Marcus Garvey, who kind of lived for a while in the early times of Rastafarianism, and they took his ideas, and Rastafari, Haile Selassie, who they regard in a very special way. I'll say a bit more about him, and that's where they get their name from. Okay. Okay, in the 1950s and 60s, as music developed in Jamaica and roundabout, okay, we get the emergence of what we recognize as reggae music, and obviously Bob Marley being perhaps one of the most famous reggae musicians. And reggae has kind of become associated, connected with the Rastafarian movement, okay, in various ways. It's not something which is kind of overtly religious in itself, but quite a few of their songs do have a religious element and so on. They will sing their beliefs into the songs as well. And lastly, it is generally associated with black people and especially with black men. Okay, they're all black men in the picture here from the band. Of course, it doesn't mean that women and even white people cannot become Rastafarians, though obviously white people are not Africans, so they're not really connected to the bigger picture, but they can obviously believe it. But in general, most Rastafarians are black, obviously, and usually men. And I don't know if we know exact figures, but maybe there's about 1 million Rastafarians, okay, in the technical sense of believing these things in the world, possibly a little bit more. I mean, obviously, just having dreadlocks and listening to reggae music doesn't make you a true Rastafarian in the religious sense, but in a cultural sense, you can be part of that movement as well. So it's a kind of confusing thing. How do we distinguish between the two sides?
Is smoking weed a part of Rastafarianism?
Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute, okay? It is actually technically part of their ritual in that sense. We'll come to that in a minute. Okay, any more questions here? So this is background information. Any questions? Okay, let's go and look a little bit more at how it all comes about, what what their ideas are, and so on. Okay, this is Haile Selassie the first, and he was the last emperor, king of Ethiopia. Okay, they had a revolution, and he was deposed. Now it's a republic. As we said, his original name was Tafari Makonnen. That's his African original name, okay? And he lived from 1892 till 1975. And the Ras bit, as I said, is a title, like leader or duke or something. He was a member of the aristocracy in Ethiopia before he became emperor. And he was a very important figure. He was the emperor at the time when the Italians tried to take over, and eventually he became emperor again after they were defeated and so on. So his reign was quite an exciting one for the history of Ethiopia. He was crowned as Haile Selassie 2nd of November 1930. Okay, that's the point when he became leader and so on. This name means power of the Trinity. Okay? Power of the Trinity. The original ancient language of Ethiopia is Ge'ez, and it's in that form, it's in that language. It's related to Arabic. It is in fact very close. They speak a language that is close to Arabic. And in the ancient form, Ge'ez, that's what his name means. Ethiopians, or many Ethiopians, or the most important Ethiopians, perhaps I should say, are Christians, okay? And they were Christian, for example. Christianity was quite strong in what is now Ethiopia, even before Christianity became strong in Britain, okay? It's a very old Christian country. There are many Muslims as well in Ethiopia, but Christianity has for a long time been the kind of state religion. And the kings, when they became king and they were made king, they often took these religious names in that sense. So the power of the Trinity is the name he took, okay? When he was crowned emperor, obviously for many people in Africa, and also for people in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, outside of Africa, blacks as well, obviously this was a very, very exciting moment. Here was a black man, an African, becoming an independent ruler, okay, not under the direct control of people from Europe in any way. Sorry? No, they had previous ones, but they'd had some kind of political troubles during the early part of the 20th century. So there had been, in the 19th century, early 20th century, also black rulers. But then there'd been some trouble. Then finally he came to the throne, okay, to try and set things straight again. So there was no white rulers. He wasn't replacing anyone, so there was black rulers before. But this was an exciting and kind of moment for them, okay. And he was a young, important figure at that time. So for many people, his coronation, his becoming king marked an important moment, important step in kind of African history, and he came to symbolize kind of African independence, and people could focus these ideas, as we said, of self-determination upon him. Some people then began to take it a bit further. Okay, they began to take their interpretation of him and his importance further, and that's what becomes the basis for Rastafarianism. Okay, they believe that Haile Selassie is what they call the Black Messiah, and he is God incarnate. Okay, let's examine those two words, those two phrases. Messiah, what does that mean to you? Where does that come from? Sorry?
The incarnation of Jesus, I guess.
We go further. Messiah, Messi, is associated with Jesus, but it didn't begin with him. Okay. The original concept of Messiah is Jewish, Hebrew. Okay. The Christians took it over and said he is the Messiah. In Jewish tradition, there had been the idea that a leader would come who would lead Israel, the Jews, out of domination by someone else, the Romans later on, of course, Babylonians before them or whatever. And he would be a kind of partly religious, partly military kind of a leader or something like that, okay, a savior for their people. So Christians took that idea and said Jesus is the Messiah, but in this case it's the savior for the whole world, not just for the Jewish people, okay, but they took the Jewish concept, and that's why you get Messi in Arabic and Turkish and so on connected with Jesus. But there were other people who could have been or were or may have been messiahs beforehand, but it's a Jewish thing. And it's this idea of being a savior, of somehow saving people, okay, which is important to the concept here. So for Rastafarians and some others as well, okay, Haile Selassie was a kind of messiah figure. He was the independent ruler in Africa, and on him the future of kind of Africa depended in that sense, and he would be the one to bring Africans out of slavery, out of colonialism, and bring people back to, bring them all back to Africa and so on. So he had a messiah role in that sense. Slightly more complicated is this idea of God incarnate. What's that then? Anyone know what the carn bit here? Chili con carne. Do you like Mexican food or pseudo-Mexican food? You ever had chili con carne?
I guess it's like God in the soul of God in the body of a man.
Yes, okay. The carn bit means flesh here, okay, carnis. So God in flesh, which is what Christians believe Jesus Christ was, as we've said before. God put part of himself, in a sense, into a human body, into flesh. And what they say is that Haile Selassie is also an incarnation of God, okay? And he is, in fact, like the second coming of Christ. It's Jesus Christ come again. They sometimes say the second advent here means something like coming, okay? So Jesus Christ was God incarnate 2,000 years ago, and then in the 20th century we have the same thing happening again. Haile Selassie, okay, becomes or is regarded as Jesus Christ or God in flesh returned, okay? So he has a religious, specifically religious role. The problem is, of course, he didn't believe this himself. He was a good Christian. He followed the traditional Orthodox beliefs of Ethiopia. He didn't see his role as a Messiah role, that obviously he did see himself as fairly important as an independent ruler. And he certainly didn't believe that he was the incarnation of Jesus Christ. Okay? But right up until his death, people in Jamaica and elsewhere would say these things about him, but he personally didn't believe it. Okay? And I think on more than one occasion he might have said, well, that's not quite true and so on. But They were just said, oh, well, he's being modest, he doesn't want to say these things or whatever, or he doesn't believe it properly and things like that. But they continued to believe these aspects of him. They sometimes refer to him as HIM, him. This is his imperial majesty. Okay, he's the full form of that acronym. Okay, HIM, his imperial majesty, is.
Is the abbreviation used for the queens?
Well, sometimes you will refer to, well, you will usually say Your Majesty or His Majesty. It's a way of referring to a king or queen. Okay, if the Queen of England were here now, I might say Hello, Your Majesty, or something like that. Okay, and he was an emperor of Ethiopia in that sense. So it's but the Rastafarians use it. They will often sometimes say him or HIM in that sense. Okay, they simplify it as a way of referring to him in that way. On the 21st of April 1966, Haile Selassie did very briefly arrive at Kingston, Jamaica. Okay, so for them that's also a very exciting day. That is when HIM, Haile Selassie, actually came to Jamaica. Okay, this is part of his political and diplomatic actions as ruler of Ethiopia. But for Rastafarians, of course, to actually have him in their country was a big moment as well. And that's an important day for Rastafarians because of that event and so on. And I think Bob Marley was actually maybe in the crowd of people in the streets watching his car go past or something like that. Okay, and therefore it becomes a special personal thing for Rastafarians as well. Okay, any questions here? That's all clear so far? The important bit, obviously, is this bit, okay, and their focus on this figure. And although the man himself denied this, and to you and me, obviously, it's not something we believe, as we said before, all religions begin in some small way with what other people would see like a crazy idea, but as more and more people come to believe it, it becomes the truth. It becomes the orthodoxy, the official truth, and so on. So, whereas I don't think Rastafarianism is going to go on to become a kind of major world religion like Christianity or Islam or something like that, its development and its religious ideas, however strange they may seem to non-believers, are the truth for the believers in that sense, but they will always remain a smaller one on the world stage. Okay, let's say a little bit about their writings, which are not all really their writings in fact at all, but texts which are connected to Rastafarianism and Rastafarian beliefs and so on. But none of them are really properly Rastafarian writings as such, but they are texts which they accept. Okay, we'll begin again with the Bible. Christianity, obviously the main form of religion in the Caribbean at the time when Rastafarianism emerged, and many Rastafarians were originally Christians or influenced by Christianity and so on. So they accept the Bible. They accept the Bible as a holy book, okay? And a lot of their writings are based upon ideas of the Bible. However, what they say is the Bible is only half written. The rest is in men's hearts. Okay? So, for them, what we have as the Bible today, as obviously the Word of God, revelation from God or whatever, only about half of the truth has actually been written down and printed as a book. And the rest of it has not been revealed properly, but it's in human hearts. Okay, we get the truth from God. So that allows a certain amount of interpretation, of course, to say, well, what I think is this because it's in my heart, and so on. And it's not exactly the same as what the Mormons said, but it's again similar, and we have a similar interpretation in Islam, that obviously this is a very important book, we can't deny it, but it's not all true. Okay? In Islam, I think the standard belief is that God revealed the truth, but people sort of changed it and made mistakes to it, and that's what becomes the Bible. So it's partly the truth. And the Mormons have a similar idea. Remember, they say the Bible is a holy book as far as it's correctly translated. And they produce John Joseph Smith claims to have been shown the true version, which is what the Mormons claim to have. These guys, slightly differently, okay, they accept the Bible as it is, but just say it's not complete. And the rest of it has not been written down, but it's in our hearts. We can find the truth when we think about God or whatever and things like that. So they have the Bible, okay, and the bit in the hearts as well. Two other important texts connected to Rastafarians in one way or another, okay. Firstly, this one here, the Holy Pibby. I'm not really sure where Pibby comes from, but it looks like Bible somehow. It's like a corruption of the word Bible. It's sometimes called the Black Man's Bible, as you can see there. And its author, I'm not sure how you pronounce the middle name, but something like Robert Athley Rogers was the author of this text. It emerged. It was written in the early part of the 20th century, okay, I think published first in 1924, okay, so it dates before the Rastafarian movement, but it's an attempt at writing a kind of version of religious events. It talks a lot about Ethiopians. It really means Africans there, okay. It talks about Ethiopians, it means Africans in general, okay. It uses that term, but it means people of African origin. It's an important work in that sense. And in some cases, people believe that it's closer to the original, it's got parts of the original Bible. I didn't mention before as well, I should add. With reference to the Bible, many Rastafarians believe that the original Bible was not written in Hebrew or Greek, which are versions that we accept for the Old Testament and New Testament today, but the Bible was originally written in Amharic, which is another Ethiopian language. It's the main spoken language of Ethiopia today. Again, to try and take this religion and make it African, okay? So that the original Bible was in Amharic. And they believe that parts of the Holy Pibby are perhaps closer to the original Amharic Bible in that sense, okay? I think he was kind of, yes, some kind of a priest or something like that. He had a religious position. I'm not sure exactly what he was, but he wrote this text, and it's got Pan-African elements in it. It fits into the time, the ideas of Marcus Garvey and others, but putting it into a religious context as well. Okay, so it's not a Rastafarian text. It was not written by a Rastafarian, but they take his book as an important reference point in that sense. This one is kind of Rastafarian, the Promise Key. Okay, Leonard P. Howell was an early Rastafarian, though he later changed his ideas and said, I don't think that Haile Selassie is God incarnate, so he changed his opinions later on. But he was an important figure and so on, and an important leader at that time, but he changed his views, and I think eventually he ended up being put into a mental institution or something like that. He was had some problems. But so this is a kind of pseudo Rastafarian text. The ideas in here reflect a little bit of what the Rastafarians believe. And lastly, they also like or give importance to something called the Kebra Nagesht, which is an Ethiopian epic or legend going back to, I think, like the 12th century or something like that, or 11th, 12th century. Okay, it was written probably 1100s to 1200s, something like that. Okay, it's an old legend. It was written not in Amharic, but in Ge'ez in the Middle Ages. In this legend, they take the biblical figure in the Old Testament. She's called the Queen of Sheba. She's kind of an African queen, okay, who is mentioned in the Old Testament. And they say that she heard about Jerusalem and the important Jewish kingdom in Jerusalem. So she decided to visit there. So she goes to Jerusalem, from Africa to Jerusalem, and meets the king of the Jews, Suleiman, of course, in Arabic, Turkish form. And while she's there, he kind of tricks her and seduces her, okay, and makes her pregnant. And she leaves eventually, heads back home to Africa. What was that? What is it? Your phone? All right. An interesting ringtone that you have there. And from this union with Solomon, she has a son called Menelik, okay, or Menelik sometimes. She goes back to Africa and has this son. And he has been given, I think, a ring which will identify him. He has a ring which, when Solomon sees it, will say, oh yes, you are my son. This is the way to identify him. 20 years later or so, when he's a young man, Menelik decides to go to Jerusalem himself to meet his father. Okay, so he goes there and says, look, I am your son, and so on, here is the ring, and they get together. And then after a while, he decides to go back to Africa. Just as he's leaving, some of his followers steal what in English is called the Ark of the Covenant, which was a very important kind of holy relic, holy thing for the ancient Jews, okay, a special religious thing that the God had sent to the Jews earlier on, and it's meant to be based in Jerusalem. But as Menelik is leaving, some of his African supporters steal the Ark of the Covenant, which is a very big symbolic thing, okay, that means that they're taking the power, the religious power of the Jews in that sense. So on the way back, Menelik finds out that they've got the Ark of the Covenant. Hey guys, what's this doing here? And they said, well, you said you might, I think he wanted a little piece of it or something, and his father said, you can have a little piece, but they took the whole thing or whatever. Solomon finds out and tries to get it back, but fails, and they arrive back in Africa. I think, again, they associate it with his kingdom, with the ancient Ethiopian capital at Aksum, okay, sometimes spelled Aksum like that, okay, which was an important early historical site there. So they're putting it now very much into the Ethiopian context. And then his mother says, I will no longer be the queen, you can be the king, and he's got the Ark of the Covenant. He's got the thing sent to the chosen people, the special people by God, to him. And there's some more parts of it. This is the sort of central part of the Kebra Nagesht. Now, what does it mean, this? What do you think this story is doing? And why is it then important for the Rastafarians? But let's begin with the text itself, the story I've just told you. What's the purpose of this story? Menelik is made to be the son of Solomon, the king of the ancient kingdom of Israel.
So I guess the late people identify themselves with Jewish, and they always prophets, and they claim they have parts, they played important parts in religious, historic religion.
Yes, I mean the Old Testament, this is all based upon, this is all taking bits of the Old Testament, the Jewish holy book, and twisting it round and so on, okay? Again, depending on your perspective, or it's true if you believe it, of course, but it's based on the Old Testament. It's giving a political connection between Ethiopia and what for most people was the most important kingdom before the Romans, the kingdom of the Jews, because it's in the Bible and that's where Jesus was and so on later on. So it's making a political connection, saying we are the successors of the ancient Jews in the Bible, and the Bible was the important book for them. And by taking the Ark of the Covenant, which is a religious symbol, they're also saying we've got that now, we are the religious successors, followers of the Jews. So the Jews have kind of lost their position as the special people of God. Politically and religiously, it's the Ethiopians. Okay, they're trying to give importance to themselves. So it's kind of doing, in the Middle Ages, what they were doing with this text was similar to what we saw Joseph Smith doing in the Book of Mormon. You see in the Book of Mormon, they tried to take Near Eastern religion and make it American. Okay, in various ways. And what the Ethiopians are doing was taking Near Eastern religion and making it African. Okay? And obviously that's very good for Rastafarians and for Pan-Africanists who say, well, human beings began in Africa, we should all go back to Africa and so on, it's the important place, or whatever. So for them, some legend like this, which connects Africa with the important religious and political developments in the Bible, is a key to their own development in that sense. So we have 4 texts here which we can connect with the Rastas, with the Rastafarians, but are not really Rastafarian proper, except for maybe the Promise Key. We have the Bible, which they accept, but then they twist it a little bit and say there's more to it. There is this text called the Holy Pibi, which is kind of part of this Pan-African idea and putting religion with the Ethiopians, with Africans. We've got the Promise Key written by an early Rastafarian, and then we've got this medieval, ancient Ethiopian story which tries to connect Africa with the Jewish tradition. And many Rastafarians believe that Africans are one of the lost tribes of Israel, okay? That there was groups of Israelites who became broken from the other ones, and Africans are kind of descended from, or Ethiopians are descended from those ancient Jewish people, again, because it's important for them. It's in the Bible, and the Bible said that God likes the Jews in that sense. And there are, in fact, in Ethiopia, there are people who are actually technically Jewish, okay, African Jews who live in Ethiopia, and so some, and they do have beliefs which are clearly related to Judaism, so they must have come at some point from there, but obviously we can't explain the whole continent in that sense. But they're giving importance to the Old Testament, they're changing it and twisting it, fitting it into an African way, okay, in the Middle Ages, but also that's something which the Rastafarians like, because they are Pan-Africanists and they want to focus on Africa in that sense. Okay, any questions there? Anything problematic? Okay, we've only got 2 screens left of this, then we'll finish. But let's have a break now. It's coming up to about 11:30, and then we'll look at their beliefs and their religious life, and we might be able to finish a little bit early today, okay?